Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Finding Folklore, the podcast that brings all that is myth, legend, and folklore from Scotland and beyond to you at home. I'm your host, Ryan, and today we are going to look at a ghost story. So, there are so many ghost stories from around Scotland, and I realise I haven't actually told many of them on the podcast at all, really, with the exception of talking about the Mackenzie poltergeist and the Covenanters prison. So if you're into ghost stories, check that story out. And I think I will sprinkle in a few more ghost stories here and there as we go from the podcast. So without further ado, this story is called The Ghost of Innerwick, and it takes place in East Lothian, near where I grew up. And it was a story I heard as a child, and remembered vaguely. I've only looked in here briefly to retell it, so hopefully I get most of the stuff correct. So the year was 1722, and it was early in the year, a cold, biting year. And the minister from Innerwick was on his way home from Humby. He had been visiting the Scottish borders. And as he travelled on horseback back to Innerwick, he felt something unusual, something creepy behind him. He couldn't place it, but he got cold and his hairs stood on end. And so Minister Ogilvy sped up his horse and tried to get back to Innerwick as fast as he could. But no matter how fast he rode, the feeling was always behind him, gaining on him, getting closer and closer. And riddled with fear, the minister clutched onto his staff. And as he was sure whatever was behind him was about to catch him, he swung that staff back with everything he had. But the staff didn't connect. It went clean through the air and almost brought him off his horse. He dropped the staff to the ground, but there, before him, was a man on horseback. A man he should have hit, but the staff had passed through. "Who are you?" the minister asked. And the man smiled and said, "I am the Laird of Cool." Well, the minister knew this couldn't be true, because he had heard that the Laird of Cool had died not weeks before. He dismounted and went to pick up his staff, and the Laird asked him, "Minister Ogilvy, I've sought you out. I want you to pass on a message to my dear wife for me." The minister refused, for how could he pass on a message from a dead man? A message that wasn't given to him when the man still lived. People would think him crazy. So he mounted his horse and went back to Innerwick. And the two rode side by side. And the minister couldn't describe what had happened. But he did know that when he got back to Innerwick, the man beside him vanished. A month passed, and the minister had thought about the interaction. Thought maybe, just maybe, he had imagined it. It had been a cold night, and he had had one glass of wine more than he should have. Maybe two. And these things happen. Sometimes you think you see things, especially when things are a bit creepy, and his imagination could have done the rest. But on a similar night, the moon bright in the sky, deep into March, he was going home on his horse, returning to Innerwick. And he felt that eerie presence again. He felt it behind him, and he clutched his staff and he thought of swinging, but he thought, I'll look first. And he looked over his shoulder, and there, on horseback, was the man who had claimed to be the Laird of Cool, wearing the exact same clothes he had worn the month before. And the Laird asked him, can you pass a message to my good wife? And the minister refused. And the two rode side by side on their journey back to Innerwick, and the man tried to convince the minister to pass this message on. But the minister felt uncomfortable. He didn't feel like anyone would believe him, and he didn't want people to think that he had lost his mind. And as they arrived in Innerwick, they got to the manse, and he turned to say farewell, but the man had vanished. Another month passed, and the minister met the man on the road again. He had expected to see the man again, and so he said, when the man asked, can you pass a message to my wife? The minister said, I'll consider it. But first, I want you to answer some questions for me. He hadn't, however, prepared the questions. He wanted first the man's agreement. And the man who claimed to be the Laird of Cool agreed. And so the minister went home and spent the next month thinking of all the questions you could ask a dead man. The following month, the minister asked these questions. He asked about the afterlife, and he asked about how the man lost his life, and everything lined up. The man knew exactly how the Laird of Cool was said to have died, and by all accounts, could describe it perfectly. The minister was convinced that he was in fact talking to the Laird of Cool. The man spoke of the afterlife and spoke of how he can touch nothing. He spoke of how his horse that he rode was not actually a horse, but the soul of another man who had once worked for him. He spoke about how the people in heaven experienced sheer serenity, and those in hell were trapped in the knowledge that every sin they had ever committed. He spoke of many things and answered all the minister's questions satisfactorily. And when they were done, the man gave the minister a message to pass on to his wife. The minister took out a pen and paper and wrote the message down. The Laird told him that while he was alive, he was not a good man, and he had conned many out of a lot of money, out of land and property and more. He wanted the wife to make up for this. She had enough money aside that she should pay back people one by one by one, undoing every wrong the Laird had done in his life. And only when this was done would the Laird be allowed out of purgatory, where he could only enter the world once a month, and eventually he would be allowed through the gates of heaven. The minister took all this down and promised that soon he would visit the Laird's wife and pass on this message. The minister never had the chance. Days later he passed away, and we only know of these accounts through his diary being found in a locked drawer under his desk. Now, 300 years later, people still say they can see a man riding on horseback once a month when the moon is high in Innerwick. Perhaps the man who was once the Laird of Cool. And that is our ghost story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Uh, and I hope I told it properly. Like I say, it's been a long time since I've heard it. So hopefully the details were correct. If anyone listening is from Innerwick, please let me know. If I've made any mistakes, let me know in the comments. I am always interested to hear. In a live sense, unfortunately, we were supposed to be doing a show on uh, in June. Can't remember the exact date, but that show has unfortunately been cancelled due to issues with the venue. That was with myself, Sandra, and Caroline, who will be on the next episode. But we do talk about that show because it was pre recorded. Just know if you're listening, that show is not going ahead, unfortunately. But future shows and updates on more live events will be coming soon, along with variety of new guest storytellers. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Click the thumbs up and share this. And until next time, may the devil walk behind you. Bye for now.